Okay, well, we're very excited because we've actually managed to get a very rare interview with the Secretary General of the UN. So we're going to meet him in his office now and ask him what he makes of the recent developments. Why is it important to strike a deal at the Security Council, and how does it relate to the Copenhagen process?
Yes, this is a very important question, and we're very keen that this be seen as a process that can be working in conjunction with, but not necessarily dependent upon, what's happening at Copenhagen. The very nature of the proposal for the meeting was that we deal with climate change very specifically as a matter of international peace and security, and of concern therefore to the Security Council. Really the priority, I believe, for the Security Council is to demonstrate leadership and authority and to take responsibility, because fundamentally it's the permanent members of the Security Council that many would argue have been able to develop almost without constraint over recent decades and centuries. So it's really upon their shoulders that the responsibility falls.
Now the UK, Austria and France have put a working paper on the table. What do you think of what they've proposed so far?
I like in particular the attention to detail in terms of pulling apart the problem that we face. I think if we try to deal with climate change as a monolithic dilemma, we are not going to get very far. So we need to deal with the specific problems that are contained within this puzzle. So looking at deforestation is the way they've taken this. I would encourage them to think about land use and changing land use in particular. I like also the suggestion of establishing a more formal body under the auspices of the UN. And again, not a body that simply replicates the tasks of the IPCC and others, but rather a body that deals with the fundamental implications for peace and security. And I think this is what's really crucial about this meeting.
A working paper signed by several European delegations proposes the expansion of a global carbon market, which could allow industries in the West to meet emission targets by paying for reductions in the developing world. Now, some environmental groups say this offers industries an easy way out, which could stall serious action to reduce their own emissions.
My personal feeling is that it's not viable to rely solely upon a carbon exchange system, a carbon trading system, that for the very reasons you highlight. This won't necessarily reduce levels globally aggressively enough. So I would favour, I think, a set of proposals that push for a more meaningful financial and more responsible financial package in order to support those whose carbon emissions are very low, rather than to encourage them to take on via some sort of trading mechanism the carbon emissions of other states.
But can this process have any value or meaning if China doesn't make binding commitments?
I wouldn't like to isolate China individually. I think it's important that all member states be participating in this process. And naturally, if any of the larger nations, whether they be developed or in the process of development, naturally, if any of those choose to unilaterally defect from an agreement, it's going to make it very difficult. So I think our attention should not be on an individual state per se, but upon making sure that whatever deals we're able to achieve reflect the interests of all.
All the working papers seem to be only talking in very vague terms about the amount of money that will be given to developing countries to help them kind of reduce their emissions. Does this concern you? Do you think the delegations need to make more specific commitments in terms of how much money they will transfer for these kind of purposes?
Well, as I mentioned before, the Kyoto Protocol included an expectation about funding what at the time was referred to as a special climate fund, in addition to the Least Developed Nations Fund. Both of these were opportunities for the developed countries, the richer countries, to invest seriously and aggressively in the technological solutions that would be available to the poorer nations. And I would encourage them to build upon that process. It's established. It's simply at this point not received the amount of funding appropriate and necessary.
That's all for this edition. Join us next time on CNN for more updates.